the Jefferson Nickel. It's been in circulation since 1938, featuring the profile of the third U.S. President, Thomas Jefferson, and Monticello, his famous Virginia estate. Over the decades, this humble 5-cent coin has given rise to some truly rare and valuable pieces that every collector should know about. So, let's explore the top 5 most valuable Jefferson Nickels, along with the fascinating stories that make them so special. First up, the 1970s Jefferson Nickel. You might think a worn-out 5-cent piece isn't worth much, especially one from 1970 with a San Francisco mint mark and in bad condition. But every coin tells a story, and even a circulated nickel like this one holds value, especially for collectors who appreciate history, mint variety, and the full picture of American coinage. The Jefferson Nickel series began in 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel, and it has been a constant in U.S. coinage ever since. By 1970, the design remained unchanged, featuring the left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his home, Monticello, on the reverse. The 1970s Jefferson Nickel was struck at the San Francisco Mint, and it's known for being part of a time when the Mint primarily used the S mark on proof coins. However, the 1970s is one of those exceptions because it was made for general circulation, though in lower numbers compared to Philadelphia or Denver nickels. In total, over 238 million Jefferson Nickels were struck at the San Francisco Mint in 1970. That's a relatively modest mintage compared to other years, but it's still a high number, which means these coins are not rare in general. However, condition and specific features play a huge role in value. Now let's talk about a 1970s nickel in bad condition. Maybe one that's been in circulation for decades, with scratches, dings, and fading detail. In most cases, a coin like this won't carry premium collector value. Its value is generally around face value, 5 cents, simply because it's too worn to appeal to collectors seeking high-grade examples. However, it can still be important for beginners building a date and mint mark set of Jefferson Nickels, or for educational purposes when learning to identify mint marks, strike quality, and changes over time. But don't count it out just yet. Even a circulated 1970s nickel can become interesting if it has an error. Look out for doubling, off-center strikes, or die cracks. These types of minting errors can boost the value significantly. Some error. Coins, even in poor condition, have been sold for several dollars or more depending on the severity and rarity of the mistake. There's also the matter of full steps. Although rare, if you happen to find a 1970s nickel with clear, full steps on Monticello, and somehow it has survived with that detail visible despite circulation, that coin could be worth far more, especially if it's verified and graded. But realistically, a heavily circulated coin is unlikely to have that level of detail. So, to summarize, a 1970s Jefferson nickel in bad condition usually holds only its face value of 5 cents. It's not a key date, and in worn condition, it's considered common. But that doesn't mean it's worthless. Every coin, even the ones that look rough and dull, connects us to a piece of American history. From the image of Thomas Jefferson to the San Francisco mint mark and the economic story of the early 1970s, this small coin is still a link to the past. If you're holding on to a 1970s nickel that's been through decades of pockets and cash registers, don't throw it away. Keep it as part of your journey as a collector. It might not be a jackpot coin, but it still has a story, and that's what coin collecting is all about. Next up, a coin that holds a quiet but important place in U.S. coin history. While it might not be one of the flashiest coins in the series, the 1946 nickel marks a major transition in American coinage, and it remains a fascinating piece for collectors who appreciate history, subtle design changes, and affordable vintage coins. Let's start with the story behind it. The Jefferson Nickel was introduced in 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel. It was designed by artist Felix Schlag, and his portrait of President Thomas Jefferson on the front and his Monticello home on the back would remain largely unchanged for decades. But the 1946 nickel represents a turning point, because it was the first year the U.S. Mint returned to the traditional nickel composition after World War II. During the war years from 1942 to 1945, nickels were made using a special wartime alloy of 35% silver, 56% copper, and 9% manganese to save nickel for military use. These wartime nickels are easily identified by the large mint mark above Monticello on the reverse. But in 1946, the mint went back to the original composition, 75% copper and 25% nickel. As a result, 1946 was the first post-war nickel, and collectors often see it as a historical milestone in the Jefferson series. Now let's talk about mint marks. The 1946 Jefferson Nickel was produced at 3 different U.S. mint facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia coins have no mint mark, the Denver coins have a small D, and the San Francisco coins have an S, both located to the right of Monticello on the reverse. In terms of mintage, Philadelphia produced the most, over 161 million coins. Denver followed with around 45 million, and San Francisco produced roughly 13.5 million coins, making the 1946S the lowest mintage of the 3. However, even the 1946S is relatively common in circulated condition, as many of these coins were saved or collected over time. So what about value? In circulated condition, a 1946 Jefferson nickel is generally worth between 5 cents and 25 cents, depending on its wear. These coins are still relatively easy to find in pocket change or coin jars, especially the Philadelphia issues. However, if you find one in uncirculated or mint state condition, that's when the value increases. For example, a 1946 nickel with strong luster and sharp detail can be worth $2 to $5 in lower uncirculated grades and up to $20 or more in higher mint state grades. Collectors especially seek out coins with full steps. This means the steps on Monticello are sharply struck and completely visible. A 1946 nickel with full steps, certified by a grading service like PCGS or NGC, can be worth well over $100, depending on the grade and mint mark. Some high-grade 1946S full steps nickels have sold for several $100s at auction. It's also worth checking your 1946 nickels for possible errors. Look closely for doubling on the date or letters, die cracks, or off-center strikes. These minting mistakes can significantly increase the coin's value, even if it's otherwise circulated. So, whether you're a beginner going through old change or a seasoned collector searching for the perfect full-step specimen, the 1946 Jefferson Nickel offers a lot of value, not just in dollars, but in historical importance. It's a symbol of America's return to peacetime production, a reminder of how even small changes in metal composition reflect major shifts in world events, and a staple of any complete Jefferson Nickel collection. Next up, today, we're focusing on the 1948 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that may not be rare at first glance, but still has a place in U.S. coin history and holds value for collectors, especially in fine condition or better. So whether you're a seasoned numismatist or just getting started, let's take a closer look at what makes the 1948 Jefferson Nickel worth your attention. The Jefferson Nickel has been a staple of American pocket change since 1938. Designed by Felix Schlag, this coin features a left-facing portrait of President Thomas Jefferson on the front, and the reverse displays his Virginia home, Monticello. This design remained unchanged for many decades, and the 1948 issue is part of that classic early series that many collectors enjoy completing. By 1948, the United States had fully returned to post-war coinage. The wartime silver nickels had ended with the 1945 issue, and beginning in 1946, the mint resumed the original composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. That remained in place through 1948 and beyond. There was no silver in the 1948 nickels, but they were solid, high-quality coins that were made to last. Now let's look at mintage. The 1948 Jefferson Nickel was produced at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 89 million coins, the Denver Mint about 45 million, and the San Francisco Mint produced approximately 11.3 million, making the 1948 the lowest mintage of the 3. All coins feature their mint marks on the reverse, to the right of Monticello, with Philadelphia coins showing no mint mark at all. Now, what does it mean if you have a 1948 Jefferson Nickel in fine condition? In coin grading, fine refers to a circulated coin that still has most of its major details visible, but shows clear wear, especially on high points like Jefferson's cheek and jawline or the steps of Monticello. It's a middle-of-the-road condition, not a damaged coin, but certainly not mint state. In today's market, a 1948 Jefferson Nickel in fine condition is usually worth between 10 and 25 cents. That's not a fortune, but it's still 2 to 5 times face value, and for collectors trying to complete a circulated set by date and mint mark, it's a valuable and affordable coin to add. That said, some 1948 nickels can be worth much more, especially if they're in uncirculated condition with strong details and luster. Coins with full steps, where all the steps on Monticello are clearly visible and unbroken, command significant premiums. A 1948D or 1948S nickel with full steps and high mint state grades can sell for $100 to $500, depending on the sharpness and certification. And of course, collectors also keep an eye out for any mint errors. A 1948 nickel with a double die, off-center strike, or die cracks could be worth far more even in circulated grades. So it always pays to examine your coin closely, even if it looks worn. Ultimately, the 1948 Jefferson Nickel in fine condition is a great example of how history and value meet in even the simplest of coins. It may not be a rare treasure, but it's part of a series that has been in American hands for generations. Every time you hold one, you're holding a small piece of post-war America, a time of rebuilding, optimism, and steady growth. So next time you're looking through your change or organizing your collection, don't overlook those old nickels. Even the ones with a little wear can still tell a rich story, and just might be worth more than you think. Next up, the 1969 Jefferson Nickel. At first glance, it might look like any other 5-cent piece you've seen in your pocket change, but this coin actually has a unique place in U.S. coinage history. And even in fine condition, it carries a bit more value than most people expect, especially for collectors who appreciate vintage coins from the late 1960s. The Jefferson Nickel has been a staple of American coinage since 1938. Designed by Felix Schlag, it features the familiar left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the front, and on the reverse, we see a classic image of his Virginia estate, Monticello. This design remained unchanged for decades, and the 1969 issue is part of that long-running legacy. By 1969, the United States Mint was producing coins in very high quantities to keep up with economic demands. The coin shortage from earlier in the decade had subsided, but production remained strong. The 1969 Jefferson Nickel was struck at 2 different mints, Philadelphia and Denver. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 146 million nickels that year, and the Denver Mint added another 202 million. Notably, San Francisco did not produce any business strike Jefferson Nickels in 1969, only proof coins for collectors. If you're holding a 1969 Jefferson Nickel and it doesn't have a mint mark, that means it was struck in Philadelphia. If there's a small D on the reverse, to the right of Monticello, then it came from the Denver Mint. Now let's talk about condition. If your 1969 nickel is in fine condition, that means it has moderate wear from circulation. The major design elements are still visible: Jefferson's facial features, Monticello's columns and dome, but finer details are worn down. It's not a high-grade coin, but it's far from poor. Many collectors build date and mint mark sets using coins in fine or very fine condition, so these are still worth keeping. In terms of value, A 1969 Jefferson nickel in fine condition is usually worth around 5 to 15 cents. While that's not a huge jump from face value, it's still a small premium, and the value can increase depending on demand and market conditions. If you have a full roll of these coins or a collection of nickels from this era, the value begins to add up. Of course, things get more interesting when you consider coins in uncirculated or mint state condition. A 1969 D nickel with strong luster and sharp detail, especially with full steps on Monticello, can sell for $10, $50, or even over $100 depending on its grade. Full steps nickels are those that show all 6 steps on Monticello clearly and without interruption, and they're quite rare for this year due to generally weaker strikes. Also worth checking are error coins. Look closely at your 1969 Jefferson Nickel for any signs of doubling off-center strikes, clipped planchets, or die cracks. Even in fine condition, an error coin can be significantly more valuable. There have been a few confirmed double die-up verses and reverse errors from this time period, and collectors are always searching for new discoveries. The 1969 Jefferson Nickel might not make headlines at major auctions, but it's still a piece of American history. It was minted during a time of cultural change, space exploration, and political tension, and this small coin was in the hands of everyday Americans through it all. Holding a 1969 nickel is like holding a time capsule from a pivotal moment in history. So, whether you found your 1969 nickel in circulation or inherited it from an older collection, it's a coin worth understanding and preserving. It may not be a rare treasure, but it's a part of a series that tells the story of America in metal, year by year, mint by mint. Next up, the 1942 Jefferson Nickel. At first glance, it might look like any ordinary 5-cent piece, but the truth is that 1942 was a unique turning point in American coinage history. It marked the transition from peacetime nickels to wartime nickels, and both versions were made that year. If you're lucky enough to have a 1942 nickel, you might be holding a piece of wartime America in your hand. Let's start with the background. The Jefferson Nickel series began in 1938. Featuring a left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his Virginia home, Monticello, on the reverse. This design by Felix Schlag remained unchanged for many years. In 1942, the U.S. Mint struck nickels with 2 different metal compositions, and that's where things get interesting. At the beginning of 1942, nickels were still being made with the standard alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel. These were produced early in the year at the Philadelphia and Denver mints. But as the United States became more deeply involved in World War II, nickel, a metal essential for making military equipment, was needed for the war effort. So, later in 1942, the composition of the nickel was changed to a special wartime alloy, 56% copper, 35% silver, and 9% manganese. These silver nickels are often called war nickels, and they were struck from late 1942 through 1945. Now here's how you tell the difference. A regular 1942 nickel with no silver will look like any other coin from the series. But the wartime silver nickels have a large mint mark above the dome of Monticello on the reverse. This was the only time in U.S. coinage history that the mint mark appeared in that location. If your 1942 nickel has a big P, D, or S over Monticello, then it's a wartime silver version. If there's no mint mark or a small mint mark to the right of Monticello, then it's a standard alloy from early 1942. Now, let's talk value. A 1942 nickel made with the original copper-nickel composition in circulated condition is usually worth about 10 to 20 cents. If it's in fine or very fine condition, it might bring a little more. Uncirculated examples, especially those with full steps detail on Monticello, can be worth several dollars depending on their grade and quality. The silver wartime nickels are more valuable. Even in circulated condition, they're typically worth between $1.25 and $3 because of their silver content alone. Uncirculated 1942 silver nickels, particularly those with strong details or full steps, can be worth $10 to $50 or more. The highest grade examples certified by PCGS or NGC can sell for hundreds of dollars at auction, especially if they have rare errors or are part of a high-grade registry set. There are also a few notable errors from 1942 to look out for. Some collectors have found double-die examples, off-center strikes, and clipped planchets. These errors can dramatically increase the value of your coin, even if it's otherwise circulated. The 1942 Jefferson Nickel is not just a coin. It's a snapshot of American history. It represents the shift from everyday life to wartime necessity. It's the moment when something as small as a 5-cent coin became part of the national effort to support the troops and win the war. Whether it's the standard alloy version or the Silver War nickel, every 1942 nickel has a story to tell. So, if you come across one, take a closer look. Check for that large mint mark above Monticello. Weigh it, examine the surface, and think about what was happening in the world when it was made. A single coin can carry decades of history, and this one certainly does.